Welcome back, everyone. This is Axum from Fire Embros, and today we're going to be talking about Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. So Radiant Dawn is a game that was launched for the Wii, and it is the direct successor of Fire Emblem 9, Path of Radiance. This game follows Soth and Micaiah as they progress and fight for the liberation of Dane. This video will contain some light spoilers, but I'll try my best to stay away from the overall arcing story, so that way it's going to be somewhat of a spoiler-free review, but you're bound to see some things that you're like, oh my god, this is surprising. I would like to start off with mechanics for Radiant Dawn. In Radiant Dawn, we have same mechanics that we've seen in the GBA games, plus a couple of more additions on them. We have Rescue, we have Shove, we have item skills making a return here that were also in Path of Radiance and FE8. We have promotion items, we have promotion upon leveling, we have a support system in which it's finally displayed the support bonuses along with Biorythm, which are really two interesting mechanics that fluctuate into combat. The Lagoos, which are a different class of characters, which makes them virtually a liability if they're not transformed, but there are a lot of items in the game that can remedy that, like Olivey Grass and Lagoo Stones. There's also bonus experience, which allows you to load it up onto a specific character to level it up, to maybe catch it up with others or to make others snowball. There also is the unfortunate items scattered around the map that you have no knowledge about. And for the most part, it's not too bad because it's just a couple of coins here and there. But there is an occasional brave weapon in there, which is super obnoxious. And I really wish this game didn't do that because it's not fair to the player to not know where specific items are. It's not like they're in a village or something. They're just randomly on the map. There's also the ledge mechanic. Grants the distribution of a void depending on how up your character is as opposed to other characters. And this plays out in a couple of maps in which you have to face enemies that are way stronger than you, but since you have the ledge, it gives you an advantage.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Radiant Dawn has a lot of mechanics that we've been seeing culminate throughout the series up to this point, along with the additional different ones from the Lagoos and bonus experience, which allows it for a very flexible and interesting gameplay. Let's go ahead and move on to map design. Map design in this game is pretty interesting. I actually thoroughly enjoy it because there are a variety of map conditions. There are defend maps, there are defeat boss maps, there are survive maps, there are seize maps, there are rush maps. There's a couple of different ones, and every single map is very different to the other, mostly because of the way that the game gives you teams to tackle them. I kind of want you to think about this in the way as a puzzle for every single chapter, but the tools you have are constantly changing every chapter. You're not always going to have access to the same core group of characters because the game fluctuates between teams a lot, and you're going to have to choose how to solve every chapter with the resources you have available to you at that time. I could definitely see how this puts people off. It's a very kind of jarring way to present the game to you in which you have to tackle it with different groups at each point in time. But if you do like this type of setting, it's fantastically done. One thing that can't be argued is that there's a lot of map variety within the game in which you have different options, and nothing really feels like the same every chapter, because every chapter there's something new that has happened that you have to deal with. And for that much, I will say that the map design is pretty cool because each map feels unique. The bosses themselves are also really cool towards the ends of the game, and they start scaling really well, and they're really interesting mechanically fought and mechanically set up, which I think are really cool for a Fire Emblem game. Not just like a beat this guy because you outstat him type of deal. There are actual things you can do. The most unique part for me, this is part of that spoilery part I'm saying, but at certain points of the game, you're going to be facing off characters that you previously controlled, and vice versa, because you're going to be hopping around these story arcs. That is actually really unique to this game, and I thought it was probably one of the best implementations because it gave you a unique aspect in which you needed to be afraid of the characters that you created yourself. As a first-time player, though, if you don't know that and you're kind of jarringly thrown into that, it can be unfair when you're facing certain juggernauts, cough, the Grail Mercenaries. It still is very unique. Moving on to character balance. This is where the game is probably at its worst. Unfortunately, because of the way that the game is set up in which you tackle different teams for each map, you have a very small subset of characters that are leagues ahead of everybody else because they're either A, way more available than everybody else, or be so strong for the parts that they're in that they can trivialize those parts. It's not so much a specific class as it is indeed characters themselves. Horses and flyers are reigning supreme anyway because they have Kanto and whatever. But the Laguz Royals later on, not necessarily having Kanto, are still really, really powerful because their stats are way higher than everybody else and they require less resources to do it. But they're given to you at a point in the game in which they kind of expect you to. Imagine like a Goto, but a lot of Gotos at once. The problem though is that the smaller, weaker characters that come in at lower bases have a really, really hard time growing, particularly on harder difficulties. It becomes very obvious that these characters are in a tough spot where they have to compete with a lot of characters that are way better than them and that can possibly make the game a lot easier. And by using these, you're not making the game easier. So it kind of sidelines characters that could have a good spot, but it doesn't because of the way that the game is set up. These characters never really have a good time to shine. I don't think that's a good game design. I think every character should have at least some way to appear and be able to contribute. They do kind of alleviate this issue a little bit by adding things like bonus experience. And on the lower difficulties, you can target a specific unit and make it Juggernaut even without too much favoritism. It can happen. On the harder difficulties, there could be an argument that it is less likely that you'll be able to do that to multiple characters instead of having to focus on only one or two. And because of the way the maps are set up as well with different teams, some characters can have the same class but still be superior to others. One of the arguments of this is something like Zehark versus Mia. Mia is on a team in which characters are really, really strong. Because of that nature, I would tend to value Mia at a lower rate than I would Zehark. On Zehark's side, he's on a map that people really need his contributions in order to make the game easier. So it's more likely for me to invest into Zehark to make him a little bit stronger so that I can make that part of the game easier as opposed to Mia. By investing into Zehark, the game gets easier. By investing into Mia, the game is kind of just the same. So this happens only because the game is set up the way it is. It can really, really hamper character enjoyment in this game. Moving on to story. It's by far my favorite part of this game. This game has been a continuation of Fire Emblem 9, so you have all that world development from before. But if you ignore that and just take into consideration this game itself, it does a very good job in the previous parts of the chapters to explain why they're going to a specific location, explain what's going on within the world at that moment, why they're acting the way they are within the plot progressions. This game tackles a lot of difficult issues in a way that is really interesting. Things like prejudice, being more humane and listening to others. Real core values that human beings should have more are implemented in this game in such a way that they appear effortlessly through the tales themselves by relating to the characters and the stories that they tell. One of the biggest faults, however, with this plot, in the third arc, there's an addition of something that is basically just utilized to push the plot forward or to explain certain actions that have happened up to this point. And it really feels like a person just went, I didn't know what to write, so I just put this in there.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
And to be honest with you, it's not my favorite part of it at all. I think if they had tried a little harder to reach a way that they could come up with that solution, push that plot forward without having to resort to this, it would have been better. The fourth arc itself, a lot of people complain about how it just kind of like devolves into this, us versus the world type of thing. I honestly didn't bother me too much because it's been showed to you during the entire plot that this is what it's going to be, basically. It's hammered over the head multiple times that this is something that is everybody's aware of and everybody's afraid of it happening, and then it happens anyway and you're like, well, now we're going to have to deal with it. Even from the previous game as well, up to this point. So the culmination of it does make sense for me. It's the getting there from the third arc that is kind of strange from one point of view. The other two make sense, but the one point of view that's left over is kind of strange. I'm trying not to spoil it, but once you play it, you'll be like, wow, that is kind of weird, but it is what it is. There's also one last bit that I don't like about the story is that some of the stuff regarding one specific character, it's just one guy, is obscurely locked with some really weird conditions to meet in order to get to it, some really weird conditions to meet from the previous game as well. So there is no way you could know this without looking at a guide. Do not like it when a game hides important character development stuff behind obscure objectives. You can do that with the boss fight in some ways if the boss fight is accessible and I can tackle the boss fight without losing my character or something of the sort. But for this, they just went out of their way to hide this information in such a way that it's a super, super obscure plot point that you have to really dig in to get to it. And I'm not a big fan of how it was presented. I am a big fan of it. I'm just not a big fan of what I had to do to get to it. To conclude, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn is probably one of the better Fire Emblems if you're looking at it from an objective standpoint in terms of map design and mechanics, in such a way that it feels better to play it, including making the Laguz more liable on enemy phase and more aggressive on player phase. The map design also gives you a bunch of interesting different options, so you're never really feeling bored when you're playing the game. There's always something different to do. There's always a new set of characters that you just got. But at the same time, this might really hamper people's enjoyment of linearity. This game is not very linear at all. And if you're a person that likes linearity, likes the same group of people, likes to do, grow your characters and stuff, this is probably not the game for you. It's not going to be very fun in that regard. I can definitely see where this was not a well-planned design in terms of pleasing people that also enjoy linearity in terms of plot. It is, however, never going to leave you bored. I'll tell you that much. I definitely appreciate the solving puzzles with different tools each time, because I like that idea of like, hey, I can't just tack in Har here and dominate everything. I need to figure out another way to do it. And that's something for me that is a great appeal. I think it emboldens you to think better, have more strategy, think different ways out of it. But the character balance in this game is completely out of whack. There's no denying that. There's a lot of problems with the balancing itself. Some characters are just delegated to being never seen or just completely outshined by the other characters that show up. But for the most part, this game is a really, really enjoyable experience with some fantastic story, some good mechanics, some interesting replayability values, because you can explore other characters with bonus experience, even if they're not the best option in that regard. I hope you guys have liked this review. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about Radiant Dawn. Please leave a like and subscribe. It truly does help. And you guys have a wonderful day.